Hello, my minions. Welcome to Demented Features. Maybe. I've got it backwards. I've still got it. There it is. So Demented Features presents Horror Hosts in the 21st Century. I am your host, Danvers. A lot of you know me by John Carroll. That's so that they don't catch me as I escape the asylum. But, so the reason why I am here is most of you are part of haunts, theaters, things like that, and you've spent all this time and energy in creating your props and your sets and your haunts, and you get to do that for, 1 month a year. So what do you want to do with it outside of that? And I suggest you become a horror host, because you can use those props, those characters, and your sets, and you can do it all year round, and you can get a fan following, sort of. So what is a horror host? Does anybody know what a horror host is? Yes? No? Okay. Well, a horror host started in the 50s. And what happened was, of course, television was more readily available, it was more affordable, people had TVs in their houses, and you needed content to fill that time. That sound familiar? There's more content coming in. So in 1957, there was a package that television stations could buy called Shock Theater. And it was all the Universal horror films and B movies and things like that. And it was a bundle that you could put on for syndication for these TV shows to watch. And so you have all these people wanting to watch fun stuff on television, and you have like the sitcoms and so forth, but you also have the late night television. And so that's where Shock Theater comes in. And they had, Frankenstein and Dracula and all these things that had never been seen outside of the theater. But what they wanted to do is they needed a way to introduce these movies and promote them and make it more exciting. So they got horror hosts to introduce the film. And a lot of times these were like people within the TV station, in the local TV station. It's like their weatherman or some producer or, somebody in the part of, behind the scenes, and they would dress them up in some cheap, awful costume and throw them on camera, and they would be like, oh, tonight we're watching Dracula. And so then it became this bizarre thing because kids would watch it, and they would find it charming, and it was almost like this horror host became that guy around the campfire that told you, everything's okay, and I know the secrets, and I'm going to protect you. And you shouldn't be watching this film, you should be in bed, but I'm here, and we're going to watch it together. So then you had almost cult status of some of these horror hosts all around the country. So you had Zachary, who passed away at almost 100 years old in 2016, who I base a lot of Danvers off of, actually. You had Vampira in LA, and she was, of course, in Plan 9 from Outer Space, but she was a huge horror host in her time. And then in my local market, where I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, we had Sivad. And his name, I think his last name was Davis, and he just flipped it. And so he was famous in that local area. And all these horror hosts who were on television, literally, they were famous in their local markets. And so that's what became enduring about these guys. And then as time went on, you got into the 50s, 60s, 70s. Then you got into the 80s. Of course, cable came along. And also the dreaded infomercial. And when the infomercials came along, it was cheaper for television stations and more lucrative for them to show these infomercials rather than these old movies and horror hosts. But it still survived. And thank God for Cassandra, because she came along and as Elvira, and then sort of you got a boost of these horror hosts, and it kind of became popular again. And she took it a little bit further. Zachary did it and kind of made fun of the movies, and he would stick himself into the movies a little bit. But she really did it. Of course, she came from the Groundlings in LA, so she had a huge improv background, and she would tear these movies apart, but still in a loving way, and it became really funny, and so she built up her audience that way. And then along comes Mystery Science Theater, and that took it even a step further. and they just sit there and rip the movies apart all day long. And you have to understand that when you're doing a lot of these movies, they are public domain and really, forgive me, shitty B movies. And there's a lot of great ones too. But to survive and get an audience, you have to kind of do a twist and make it something a little more special. So a lot of times, we together as like the horror host of the audience are all going, wow, isn't this awful? And look at this. And if you've ever seen the 2006 documentary, and I think part of it was filmed at HauntCon, called American Scary. No, that's another documentary I'm thinking of completely. Anyway, American Scary is about all the different horror hosts that were around the country, and they interview them, and you get a really good idea about what the horror host is and different flavors and what people did. So I highly recommend that. Now you can still find horror hosts all over TV. In Chicago, you've got Svengoolie, and he's on MeTV, very popular. So they're still on TV. They haven't gone anywhere, and there may be even some markets here and there that still show them. But really what's happened since the advent of the internet is we have switched over to online. And we do our our creature features and so forth there, because it's just very difficult to get on television anymore unless you're Svengoolie and have that kind of budget and money. Most of us have zero budget or very low budgets, and that's what's enduring about us. Mm-hmm. But you're already a step ahead of the game if you have a haunt, because you've got costumes, creativity, resources, and sets and things. And even if it's in like a storehouse somewhere, you set the set behind you, and you can have guests or whatever and different characters, and you introduce these movies and you're ready to go, almost. But I got to tell you about cameras and so forth. So, with YouTube and Vimeo and so forth, you've got a platform to put yourself out there and put your show on the air, so to speak. So there's a huge resurgence. There I am, Danvers. And so you can see I've got a very simple set. This was in my old garage in Austin. This is Professor Griffin, who did stuff with a magazine. Anyway, he was a horror host for different things, and I think he was on cable for a while and did some things. And so he's got a following, and this is one of his characters that he brought along. So collaboration with other horror hosts, other haunters, and getting good ideas from each other is definitely the way to go. But as you can see, it doesn't take much. And all of this can go online, and you can find your audience that way. There are also live stream channels like the Vortex with 2 X's and Eerie Late Night, which is also called the Monster Channel. And all it is just tons of horror hosted shows, and they just show movies like all day long, but they have to be horror hosted. It's not just showing the movies. It's more about celebrating these horror hosts. And you become part of the community, and you help each other and collaborate with each other. And then you grow kind of as you go. I've also known hosts who have their own shows on Roku. So there's tons of ways to get your show out there. Demented Features launched in 2012, so we're about 5 years old. And you can collaborate with anybody all over the country. If you can't make it to your specific horror host, I've done it in their sets. I've also green screened horror hosts into my set, and it's cheesy, but that's what makes it funny. So I've also got other people who work with me, and so there's many options. I've changed my sets up many times. I have something as simple as a backdrop. You can have a big castle behind you. It really depends on what you want. And that kind of goes into choosing a persona. So who is your horror host going to be? You can choose from all kinds of different archetypes. I've even heard of people who do sword and sandal films. And instead of being like a horror icon, they're like a gladiator. or something like that. So really the sky's the limit. You can do sci-fi stuff, and you can be, whatever character you want. And so this goes back to like characterization 101. And you all have done this in your haunts, or if you've done it in theater, it's really just like, who am I? What do I want? And that kind of thing. I created Danvers. I'm like, okay, what is everybody else doing? I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a vampire necessarily. I don't want to be just a monster. Nobody's doing an insane asylum inmate, so I'm going to choose that and kind of build off of that archetype. So you have monsters, vampires, witches, whatever archetype you want to do. And some examples of this, well, you got your monsters, vampires, witches, your horror archetypes, right? So we've got Count Gore Duvall. I always want to go Vol something else. I want to switch his name up. Count Gore Duvall, who started out in Washington, D.C., and he's been on the air since the 70s, and he's really the one that kind of carried everything over into the internet and really kind of made a push for that. Then you also got Penny Dreadful up here. She's a great friend of mine, a very talented person. She is very popular up in Massachusetts. She did the witch, shtick, and then she's got her collaborators. There's a werewolf, and there's a vampire hunter, and all this other stuff. And then Sir Cecil Creep, who was in Nashville. He's no longer on the air. I'm not even sure he's even with us anymore. But he was very popular in Nashville, and then of course most everybody knows it's in Ghoulie in Chicago. And this is an example of somebody who has some money and a big budget and a TV station. He used to be on TV, he probably does it out of his house now and throws it on the internet. And he goes and he hosts stuff at local theaters and does like, screenings of classic movies. He's got a little bit more of a name for himself. Penny Dreadful goes to conventions and shows off stuff as well. So once you get into this, it's very addictive. You love performing. It's like doing a haunt. It's like you get that collaboration and that feedback from people. So it can be very rewarding. You don't have to do a monster or a horror archetype. You can do unassuming, normal people. You could be a critic or a historian or a fan of horror or whatever movies you were trying to do. Some examples of this are Chili Billy from Pittsburgh, who passed away recently. We have Bob Wilkins down here. He was in San Francisco. And then, of course, Joe Bob Briggs, he was on TNT. And so, they did the whole thing with the horror hosts as well, but they were just these average guys that would comment on it like, and it's hysterical. So you don't have to go all the way and, do this big horror persona. You can just be an average guy. And it can be even funnier if you've got this great haunt behind you and you're just some normal person. Like, tonight's movie is a real stinker. So let's go into, does anybody have any questions so far? Awesome. Also, one thing before we get into studio setup, don't be afraid to evolve your character. If something is not working when you start out, keep messing with it, change it. You can scrap the whole idea and start over if you want to. It's all about, it's not like it's opening night and that's it. You got to just do it. Your character can evolve, and I highly suggest that. Put things down on paper and go, okay, I'm brainstorming this, and I like this idea, and start with this costume, and maybe that doesn't work. And, it's a matter of what your audience wants and your feedback you're getting, and really your gut feeling as well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have to worry about copywriting or anything like that when you choose your characters?
I'm getting that.
Okay.
Oh yes, I'm getting to that. Okay, so with that said, you've put your character together, let's say, and now what do you do? So you're gonna have to have some place where you shoot your video called your studio. That can be your living room. It can be a huge setup. It can be a huge big deal. You can either have no budget, which is very common. You can have a low budget, or you can have a huge budget. Most people do this as a hobby. You're not going to get rich making horror hosting these B movies. You're just not. And if you are, I want to know what your secret is. At minimum, you're going to need a camera, something to light yourself with, and audio. You can do, I mean, if you've got huge set pieces from your haunt that you're going to kind of recycle and use, do it. If you have the space for it. You can do a simple backdrop, or you can do a combination of things. I've painted just simple things and had layers of curtains and all kinds of stuff and just chairs and whatever. And then I kind of go to something more simple, or you can shoot outside and, you know, whatever your situation is. But you kind of have to decide what that's going to be, because it's going to determine how you're going to set up your audio and your camera. Are you going to be a one-man show, or are you going to have a large crew? If I am lucky, I have him to help me occasionally with cameras and audio, and it's so much easier if you have help. But it is possible to set up your camera on a tripod. You know, now they've got the flip screen, and you can see yourself, and like, okay, I'm in focus. And you turn on your audio, and you perform, and you hope to God that everything works out okay. And then you go review it, and you're like, I stepped out of frame about that much, and you got to do it over again. So, but it is you get used to it, and you know, mark a tape on the floor or something, like, I can't really move from here. It is possible to do it by yourself. And it can be a lot of fun, too. But I find it, just as an actor, I find it more fun to collaborate with other people. But it is definitely possible to do it by yourself. It's easier if you have a little bit of help. But are you probably going to have a lighting person and an audio person and a camera person? Probably not. So I would get used to doing it, you know, as simple as possible. You're also going to need, for post-production, some kind of computer to edit your stuff, editing software, and etc. But I'll tell you right now, guys, if you, let's say you're really excited about this idea and you want to become a horror host right now, you can use one of these. I bet most of you have this in your pocket. You know, you don't have to have a lot of special equipment to get started. But what I do suggest is that over time you build up your arsenal of camera equipment, weaponry. You're going to need, I would say, of all the things besides a camera, you can get away with a lot of things, but if you have bad audio, that's where it all kind of goes to hell. Because how many of you have the TV on and are listening to it without really watching it? So you want to have good audio. And doing that is a lot cheaper than it used to be. You can get a microphone. You don't have to have a boom and all this stuff. I use something called a Zoom H4n, or you can use the H1, which is about $100. I'm wearing this Lav Mic right now that I'm recording into my H1, which is in my pocket. So if you're on camera, you can't see any of this probably, or it's very subtle. You can buy a nice DSLR camera that will do video and everything for anywhere from $300 to $500, depending on the year and the model. I use cheap little lights. You can go to Home Depot and get clip lights and LCDs. LEDs are really strange right now with the way they cast light. CFLs is what I mean. I would recommend the CFLs over the LEDs right now, just because they're more reliable as far as color temperature. I would get a daylight balance, which is 2400 Kelvin. Am I saying that right? Yeah. If you go to Home Depot and you're like, I need a 2400 Kelvin, they're not going to know what you're talking about half the time. But what you can do is just get a daylight balanced light. And then if you want to do something where you need a more dramatic lighting, or you want something creepy, then you can go buy gels, theatrical gels, and just clothespin them onto your clip lights. And you would be amazed at the crappy setup you can have and how good it can look on camera. The other thing you can do is have a reflector. If you don't have lights, you can't afford it, take the shade off of your lamp, get you a piece of foam core that's white, bounce that light, and boom, you are ready to go. Or 2 lamps, something like that. You know, it can be a quick and dirty setup. It just doesn't have to be great. But the more you learn how to do something, the more you're going to want toys. It's just inevitable. You're also going to need a way to edit your video. You're going to have to put it in your computer, edit it, and do all of the things that you do with it. So I'm a Mac guy. I have Final Cut Pro. It's quick and dirty, and I love it. And it's user friendly. I don't really know what's available per PC, quite honestly, but I know that there's something out there. And there's probably free programs that you can at least try online to test the waters and see what you want to do. You just have to kind of Google editing software and see which works for you best. So, questions, comments?
Yes,
Yep.
for you right now,
Sure.
when you're doing your show, do you use that clip, Marco?
I do.
Okay, so you're not using any kind of directional things? Or...
If you look at the camera he's using right there, I have a shotgun mic on top of it so that it's directional, so it's picking up what's right in front of it.
Right.
So it's basically a backup, and and when I sync the sound, which is a little bit more complicated, but you can take sound from the camera, sound from this Lav mic, and sync it. And so this sounds better than that does because it's right here next to me, and it just sounds better. It sounds more clean and professional and articulate. That's fine, it really does. But what's going to happen is that's going to pick up more of the bounce of my voice throughout the room, and it's just not just going to be quite as clean. But
what is the name of that system you're using?
So I have to look it up. I got this from B&H. I will tell you, if nothing else, I can either email them kind of a list of what I specifically use, or I will put it on my website that you guys can go look, and I'll be happy to share that with you. I use an H4n. I use a Canon EOS Rebel T5i. I think they're up to T6i now. You can still get earlier versions cheaper. I get this from B&H in New York as well. They're just stands with these lights on it. They're basically glorified clip lights. You can, if you've got an audio person, have a boom mic and all of this other stuff. I find having a Lav and that is perfectly fine. I mean, unless you're doing a big budget movie, you don't need all that stuff. It's nice if you can have like a director to kind of say, well, try this, but you kind of have to go trial and error and look at your video and go, let's try this a different way or whatever. But this is really kind of the down and dirty one-man show kind of stuff. So, but it's fun that way too. This is another example of one of my older sets. Has anybody seen Phantom of the Opera on Broadway? Mm-hmm. Okay. One of the things I was obsessed with were the curtains. And so I kind of mimicked that, and I got these old crappy photo canvas or muslin backdrops off of Craigslist and just hung it up. I had a purple one and a green one, and I thought it looked kind of creepy, and I hung it back, and I found this at a garage sale, and I found that at a garage sale, and I just kind of cobbled stuff together, and I loved that set. So if you're the person standing here in the middle, and this is like a bird's eye view, you want to have a key light, which is your main light, and that hits you and lights you from the side. Your fill light, which can also be a reflector. I talked about that foam core that's white. It just hits that light, and it will fill up this other side of you, so you're lit all nice and pretty, or not, depending on how you want to characterize it. And then you have a backlight, which is also called a hair light. And what that does is if you have that back here or even on the ground, it separates you from your set or your backdrop or whatever, just so that it doesn't look like you're all kind of blending in, and it gives it a lot better depth of field. So really you're looking at 3 lights you need. That's it. And then your camera. And you're done. Now, if you have a bigger set and you want to light it and you want to be a little bit more extravagant, you'll need some more lights. If you're using a green screen, you're going to need more lights. And I do use a green screen from time to time. But really, for your basic kind of run and gun stuff, that's what you need. And yes, you can use daylight. So, one thing I will suggest is if you do have a crew to come help you, if you have a director, if you have a cast or whatever, chances are you're not going to be able to pay them. At least feed them. Right, Greg?
I'm hungry.
Okay. Does everybody understand kind of the editing software? I don't want to get too technical, but I just want to kind of give you the basics here. So finding content. This can get really tricky because you're starting to talk about copyright law and all of that crazy stuff. So really what you are looking at is anything before 1926 is fair game. So a lot of the silent films out there are good to go, you're ready, unless they've done some sort of restoration and they've copywritten that. But kind of if you go to like archive.org, most of the time you're going to be fine by just downloading those movies and you're done most of the time. But after 1926, that's when copyright law gets really weird and complicated. So it used to be like the author's life, or after they died, it was 75 years, and then Sonny Bono and Disney came along and screwed all of that up. And so it really is weird. What I do is I see what other horror hosts are doing. If they haven't been sued, then I think I'm good to go. I'm kind of looking to see. Now, don't look at Spenguli. He's got a budget and probably can license that stuff. But your average run-of-the-mill horror host that's on YouTube, you can look and see, okay, well, they've done The Brain That Wouldn't Die, or they've done Night of the Living Dead, or they've done Plan 9 from Outer Space. All that stuff is public domain. There's a lot of really good public domain movies. There's a lot of crappy ones, too. But the crappy ones can be fun to show. Okay, before we get into sort of the meat of that, also, I was going to show you my opening credit sequence, but for whatever reason it didn't play. But you can look at it on dementedfeatures.com. If you're going to do an opening credits with music and all that stuff, either find public domain music or get a composer to do it for you. Don't find something off of a Disney album, and because that will go bad real fast. The one other thing I will do is I will get independent film, and because there's such a finite amount of public domain movies out there, there are eager, hungry, independent filmmakers that have shorts and all kinds of things that they want shown. So, if you have somebody who wants to show their film, make sure you put it in writing that, I can show this on my channel or my YouTube channel or whatever. But the other thing you can do is if you're out shopping at a big box store or a movie store and you see those 50 movies for $10, chances are those are public domain films. And there's like 100 of them in the set or 50 of them in the set. Pick that up or whatever, and you can go to archive.org, download those films, and it's easy to find. You can also Google, and this is where you've got to be very careful, you can Google public domain horror films or public domain sci-fi films or whatever, and there will be websites devoted to you can show this, this, and this, but you got to take that with a grain of salt because not everybody ran that through a lawyer either. But if most people have done it, I'm pretty comfortable that you're not going to get in trouble. So that's really where you find your stuff, or that's how I find my stuff. Archive.org is your best friend because people will upload all these old movies to it. You can download different quality of the picture and so forth. And I've had comments like, where did you find such a great print? Well, I found it on archive.org. So, and it's a free resource, and free is always good. So I always let other people kind of do the legwork for me. Again, look on my website, and I will link some of these things. But if you go to some other horror host sites, they'll show you, this is what we've done, and I've known some people that compile a list that say, all these films are in public domain. So the copyright law in the U.S. is a complete mess. I mean, it just is. So I say all these things as beware and do it at your own risk, but I have never had a problem, and I'm really careful about what I do. But the public domain is there for a reason, and it should be that resource that we can go to and get whatever we want. And the one thing, Night of the Living Dead is the primo example, that at one point, if you did not put a copyright notice on your film or on your material, it automatically went into the public domain, and then the law changed. But that's why a lot of stuff from the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, you have some copyright, or you have some copyright-free material. And I've even seen some stuff in the 80s that's public domain. I don't know how, and I'm careful about wanting to do that, but it is out there. So there's also a thing now where there's Creative Commons, and people are making things specifically for public domain, but you have to give at least credit to the person who created it. But that's fine. I do that even with public domain stuff. But it's still free. It's still out there for you to use as you want. All right, so I talked about Internet Archive, which is archive.org. That's where you can download all of these things. It's also a great resource for books and TV shows and news reels. And one of my favorite things is you can find those old 50s hygiene videos and all that stuff. And I've seen people put that into their horror shows, and it's hysterical. So, don't limit yourself by just one thing, like, oh, I've got to show horror films. You can show whatever you want. There's public domain cartoons. So there's a lot of stuff to go out there and play with. Some examples of my favorites. Of course, I've talked about this, Night of the Living Dead, White Zombie, and The Brain That Wouldn't Die. These are things that everybody does. And it's kind of a running joke that horror hosts are going to do these films eventually, just because they're so readily available, and we know that they're public domain. White Zombie is a great, they're all great movies, but you've got Bela Lugosi, who's a horror icon, and they're great movies to start out with and start building an audience with. YouTube! I love and hate YouTube. So here is the thing. I take my public domain film and I will go in, I introduce the film. And this is kind of the typical thing, because horror hosts in the 50s would do this during commercial breaks. They would introduce the film, they would have their opening segment, you would have the first quarter of the film. Then there'd be a break, and there'd be like some sketch comedy or some shenanigans, and that was sort of the middle. And then you would go to the end of the film and you wrap it up and so forth. Or they would do weird things during commercial break. Watch Svengoolie and how he does it. I mean, there's definitely a formula to it. So I keep that kind of traditional thing. I'll have the beginning, I'll do in the middle, and I'll do the end. And you comment on the film, or I might promote something, or if I've interviewed anybody here, I might do an interview or a review or something. And then I have my public domain movie. And so I've edited it, and it looks all pretty, and it's ready to go, and I upload it to YouTube, and in 5 minutes, oh, well, so-and-so has said that this is their material, and, you can still use it, but they're going to get your revenue, such as it is, off of YouTube. And I'm like, no. And at first, when I first got on, I'm like, oh my God, I've broken the law. But what I've decided is this is what is copy fraud. YouTube is absolutely broken, and Google won't do anything about it because you've got these huge corporations, and there are people that do upload stuff that they shouldn't be uploading. That's absolutely copyrighted material, and they shouldn't be doing it. But what happens is you do have public domain stuff like A Christmas Carol from 1915. Well, that's my movie. No, it's not. No, it's not. And so you can fight it, and I recommend that you fight it. And it may even come down to, well, you can go to court, or you can still do it, and they'll still push the envelope. I'm like, let's go to court, bitch. Let's go. And of course, I couldn't ever afford to do that, but they back off. And I've even had some guy go, well, I'm a lawyer, and I'm like, you don't own this material. So, but YouTube will not intervene. This is where we really have to kind of stand up, and this is why I'm like, stand up for public domain. Stand up for fair use, because if that stuff goes away, even if you guys go off and go online and go, God, John Carroll sucked and his seminar sucked, that's still, you're protected for that. I may not like it, and I may go, well, you suck too, but, literally, if we don't have that, we can't say fair use, and we can't, do the things we want to do. So it's just, that's where I stand with that. You can subscribe to us at Demented Features, or on YouTube at youtube.com/Demented Features. Please, everyone, subscribe to us. You can watch every one of my videos, all my episodes. And what I would like is, if you guys are truly interested in getting into horror hosting, please contact me personally. It's dementedfeatures@gmail.com. If you have questions after this, I'm happy to answer any questions or guide you or do anything that you guys need to do. So, okay. So we've talked about doing things online. I've talked about Vimeo, Dailymotion. One thing I will say is that when you start your channel, get photographs of yourself, you can create a logo, do those things. Branding, it's the same thing from your haunt. You want to brand your haunt, you want to brand your horror hosting. Make sure that you are recognizable and people know who you are. Okay, so we've talked about doing it online. You can also do it on public TV access stations, public access TV stations. And it really depends on your city if you even have that option. In Austin, they have something called Channel Austin, which is a great resource, and I'll get to that. Evidently, you guys don't have public access here in New Orleans. But I think it's kind of a dying thing, because either the city is taking over it for whatever reason, or they just want to sell that signal to somebody else who's profitable. But on public access TV stations, you're going to have 100 preachers and one horror host. That's generally how it goes. Between two ferns type of thing. Bad talk shows. But you have to kind of ask yourself, is it more trouble than it's worth? Because at least at Channel Austin, you have the people who run it are, people who I'm going to do film and I'm going to do my TV thing. And so you kind of have to get in there quick. You have to usually pay for it. There's training. There may be bizarre scheduling. You may have to re-edit, like a 90-minute film may have to be compressed down to an hour. I've got several of my videos that had to be re-edited for that, just to fit within their schedule. There may not be a consistency. You may have to have different formats. They have weird policies, and then just playing their game to kind of get in and get your stuff in. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is, and it's a great resource. And I love saying I'm on television, even though it's public access. But it's kind of part of that tradition. It's that you have your shitty horror host on public access TV, and that's kind of part of the charm. So that is a resource if it's available in your market. I think up in New York and up in New England and kind of above the Mason-Dixon line, it seems like public access TV and in the Midwest is far more readily available than it is down south. I think down south it's just being gobbled up by the local government and so forth. So every city is different. It may not be available. There's definitely going to be some kind of fee, like a membership fee to get into your public access station. They're going to want to train you. But the other thing is, if you don't have camera equipment, you don't have audio, a lot of times they'll train you on how to use a certain camera, and you can check that kind of stuff out from that TV station and go use that, and you've got that resource as well. Again, time limits and formats and all that stuff. So really, is it more trouble than it's worth? Because on YouTube, I can put it up and it's done, instead of having to deal with 1,000 other people. So it's really up to you. But if that resource is available to you, it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, so in promoting yourself, I've already talked about make sure you have a logo, have pictures, things like that. of course, create a website for yourself. There are so many Wix. I mean, Weebly is what I use. There's so many easy to use things out there that you can create your website with. That's just a no-brainer. You've got to do that. It's part of your brand. With social media, use Facebook, and this is where I'm like, do as I say, not as I do. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and etc. Those social media things are out there. They're free, and it helps build an audience. I really recommend to work with some kind of charitable cause, because if you volunteer your time as your horror host persona, it's just another way of kind of getting your name out there, but you're also contributing to the community and doing something good, for animals, other people, or whatever. And just reach out to whatever cause you want and say, I can MC for your charitable event, or I can, be this person to kind of help get attention, or whatever. The sky's the limit when it comes to this kind of thing. But I always recommend that that's a good way to kind of start giving back. And then the other thing is, I really recommend collaborating with other people, with other horror hosts. I've gone around to several people here who I think are cool people. I'm like, let's do an interview. Let me promote your product, because what it does is it gives me content, and then it promotes them. I have interviewed Tom Savini. I've interviewed several people from different conventions I go to, and you may have to reach out to them beforehand, but it's like collaborate. Don't just do everything by yourself. It gives you more energy, and it makes it more interesting, and it also widens your audience. So, as I said, we're for Facebook. You've seen the one for YouTube. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Demented Features. And maybe if more people came to my Facebook page, I'd post more often. I've interviewed Russ Striner, that's who I was thinking of, and Kids in the Hall. What's his name? You all lose. Tom Savini. Tom Savini is crazy, but he was funny. He was a great interview. So, if you go to these seminars, you go to the conventions and so forth, a lot of celebrities are at these places. Take advantage of that.
With Tom Savini, did you contact him ahead of time?
He was there with the Austin Film Society, I think promoting one of his Rodriguez films or whatever it was. And I reached out to them and I said, because he was doing a talk, I'm like, hey, can I come in and take 5 minutes and just kind of do something, and would that be okay? And they said, yeah, and we talked about, I love researching what they do, and everybody talks about this. Let's go talk about this weird thing. And they light up, they're like, oh, okay. So that was fun, it was great. But yeah, I do try and reach out ahead of time just to give a heads up. I have, like Russell Striner, I said, I'm a big fan. Can I, do a quick interview with you? Would that be okay? And he's like, yeah, sure. But I've also had people who are like, and I'm like, that's fine. So just be professional and, give people their space. But the worst thing they can say is no, So we're at dementedfeatures.com, and, if there's anything on that site that are like, oh, that's confusing or whatever, let me know. I'd be interested to get some feedback. But it also kind of gives you an idea about what I do and what I put out there and promote, and it might be a template for you to kind of start your own website. I do have a blog, and I'll review horror movies and things that I like, and I call it Danvers Ramblings, and we, I talk about different things, and I talk about where I'm going to be, or things like that. So it's a really fun thing to do, and you're already in the world, so why not kind of take it a step further? And if you like performing and you like being in front of camera, you like theater, I really recommend trying it, because you basically have all the resources already at your disposal. Why not take it a step further? And we need more women horror hosts too. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to open the floor for questions and so forth, and let me know if I was too boring or too fast or too vague on something. I'm happy to expand. Yes.
Okay, so I understand you're using this to promote your haunt, which is always, a great thing.
Sure.
Is there a way to use it as profit purely in itself? The college that I work for, we're always trying to find ways to increase revenue for the college. We have a TV studio on the college. We have a radio station at the college.
Yeah.
We have a performing arts center at the college. They will kibosh this unless there's some sort of monetary return that has nothing to do with the haunt, because they don't care about that. They want to know how, other than the fact I can sell it as a student involved,
Sure.
student teaching thing, absolutely I can sell it.
Sure.
But they always like to see, is there any way it can make us money?
Okay, so honestly, I do not make very much money off of YouTube.
Right.
It's just the way YouTube is.
Right.
But there is a way. If I promoted myself more, if I really got out there and hustled, yes. I mean, if you create, like anything, if you create a fan base, yeah, absolutely. You have to do more than just your episodes.
Right.
But the thing is, if you have students there, you don't have to just do public domain films. Do their films.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we also have our own TV station. So we
Yeah,
actually
but I
have
mean,
a channel
with
as well,
with your own TV station.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's that stupid late night thing where college kids are getting high or drinking or whatever they're doing. I know that probably doesn't happen
No, of course not.
But I mean, that was the tradition. I mean, especially in the 70s, you had these people who played into that. It's like, I know you were out there misbehaving, so let's watch this stupid movie together. And so to answer your question, I do think there's a way to make a profit.
Right.
And you have a resource, I don't. You have a huge college campus. Use that horror host to, host some parties at the thing and really get their name out. Make it almost kind of a mascot almost. Because that's what these did at their TV stations. And I don't exactly know how to do it. I don't know the formula. If I did, I'd be rich.
Right.
But I do think there's a way to make money. I do. Yes.